Greetings, our saviors. I read this morning from the scriptures, from the Gospel of Luke, the 15th chapter. And I suspect that some of you will say, oh, I've heard that before. I hope that's the case. Now, all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him, and the Pharisees and scribes were grumbling and saying, this fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them. So he told them this parable. Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost. Just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Or what woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me, for I found the coin that I had lost. Just so I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Then Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me. So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. When he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have bread enough to spare, but here I am dying of hunger. I will get up, go to my father, and I will say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound. Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property and prostitutes, you killed a fatted calf for him. Then the father said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Well, there's plenty on the table here, guys. Enough for 7 or 8 good meals, and we got to make one out of it. But
yeah, and I'm going to start with the third parable, the parable of the merciful and the loving Father, and I'm going to point out 3 things in that would have been shocking to the listeners of the parable as Jesus told it. And the first one is that when the younger son says, give me the share of property that will belong to me, what the father should have done at that point was either immediately disown or beat the son, because the son is basically saying, Dad, will you drop dead for me? Which is very disrespectful. The second part is when he shows up again after his years of dissolute living. It says the father runs out to greet him. And the father would not have done that. In Jesus' society, the father, especially the one who was the aggrieved party who had been insulted, would not have run out to greet his son. He would have waited for his son to come to him. And then the third one is that when the father talks to the elder son, it says he pleaded with him to come in with him,
Yeah.
which again, he would not have done. So this would have been a shocking parable for those reasons that Jesus told to his listeners.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, right. And I mean, like, just to be clear, when you say he would not have done, it would have been not what the normal father, like a normal father in the ancient Near East in Jesus time and place would not have done this, right?
Yeah.
But this father is of a different character, proven by the fact that he does do these things, right? That he does respond, frankly, kindly when his son tells him to drop dead, I want my inheritance, right? That he responds absurdly when he, girds up his loins and runs out to the edge of his property to meet his son when he hears that he's, sees that he's coming from far off, and that he reasons with his elder son rather than saying, my word is law. That's it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So back to the dead, I like what you were saying there about the son thought that his father really was dead. The relationship that he had with his father was in a sense dead, and father was dead in his life. And I've heard young kids say, I wish you were dead. I want to kill you, or something to that effect. I mean, it happens, but in this story, it was real. But then the play on words, or the use of words at the very end, it was the son who was dead and who came alive. And all of a sudden, the father comes alive, the son comes alive, because the relationship is restored by the father's grace and willingness to accept his repenting son.
And the relationship between the two brothers begins again.
Yeah.
When the father, the elder son wants to call him your son, and the father says, no, your brother.
Yeah.
I'd be a little put out, though, if I were the older brother. I mean, here this party's going on. They just killed, as someone said, they killed the 4-H calf, and they're having this monster party, and no one even invites him. And he has to find out from a servant what's going on. So
that's one of my favorite parts, when it says, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves, asked what was going on. And, of course, one reading of that is, why is there celebrating? The other reading is that the elder son, who has worked like a slave, doesn't recognize the sound of celebration.
yeah.
So, I mean, that's kind of my reading, that here you have this fellow who has kept his nose so close to the grindstone that he has never been willing yet to enjoy everything that is already his.
And I'm sure that the older thought the younger brother had died and was kind of glad that he was out of the picture, and maybe even wished him dead. And because he didn't seem to be excited about, hey, I got a brother again. My brother finally came back home. I can't wait to see him, hug him, love him, da da da. It was, no, don't want him anymore. He's done. He's dead.
Yeah, well, I mean, and you think about it, like, just on like almost like a psychological analysis of this story, right? Where it's, I totally understand that. Like, I'm very close to my siblings, but if my brother were to do that and then to just leave, the family without any like further word, it's not only that he's telling, my dad to drop dead, it's that he's telling me that I don't matter either, right? That my relationship with him means absolutely nothing. Yeah.
One of the things that I find also in this, and we were talking earlier about the young people today, and I related also to our grandson who struggles with addiction. If you have a sense of home, of being loved in that home, a safe, secure home, a somewhat nurturing home, if you have that memory, it's nice to have. And that's what the younger son had. When he was going off, he remembered what home was like, faintly. To the young people today who have no sense of what that home is like and nothing to come back to, I think there's a sense of being lost in a way that almost seems irretrievable. And to me, that's what's going on, I think, nowadays. Is some of the young people are feeling very, very lost because they don't have that sense of where home is anymore, or they don't have, they never had that sense of home.
I'm not sure I'm there. I see the son simply thinking about survivability. Um, I see him begging for food as a slave instead of coming back into a family. And that's one of the things that I think is really interesting about this parable. Both of the sons impute things to the father that are about their assumptions and don't seem to be anything to do with who the father is. You know, that the younger son thinks he needs to beg to be treated as a slave in order simply to subsist. And the older son thinks he needs to work as a slave in order to belong. But in both cases, the father proves that that's not at all what he has in mind. So they both have in their head who their father is, but it seems to have more to do with their assumptions than with the reality.
Mhm. But he knew where home was. He knew he found his way back home.
Mhm.
Because if you would have gone searching, I mean, if you have no reference point at all in your life, I guess that's what I'm saying. If you have landmarks
Sure.
and bearing points, if you don't know where true north is, you'll screw up the rest of your life looking, and you won't have a clue as to what direction to go. And that sadly is what happens, I think, to too many young people today.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is interesting
Well,
that
yeah, go ahead.
both that I was going to say that both the brothers make these assumptions about how the father, and of course, like every metaphor, every parable falls apart, at some point, right? That's why it's not like a factual telling of a story. It's a metaphor, but it does make you wonder, like, what message had they received that made them think that way about their father, right? Like, how had he been misrepresented to them that the younger brother, assumed that he was going to be legalistic and judgmental? How had he, and that he wouldn't welcome him back? How had he been misrepresented so that the older brother viewed him as judgmental and legalistic? And wouldn't give, and almost capricious as well, like wouldn't give him the time of day unless he worked really hard. I wonder, like putting this in religious terms, right? Like, how frequently has the church misrepresented itself to people, right?
Yeah.
Taking God's name in vain by saying, God is this judgmental, legalistic overlord who sits and, just keeps tallies of like all the times you've screwed up.
I was going to go that direction too, with the metaphor of using a congregation and say, I mean, we've known people that have left and just kind of drifted away, kind of, as we say with sheep, nibbled themselves lost, just little by little away from a congregation. But then something dawns on them, or they hit a crisis, or some hard stuff bumps into them, and all of a sudden they feel like their pockets are empty and they go looking. And they usually will come back to a congregation and say, Steve, didn't you meet someone not so long ago on a Sunday morning that was kind of admitting to that they had kind of drifted away, hadn't been here for a long, long time, and now decided it's time to come back?
No, it was a visitor who had come here and really liked their first visit, but for some reason didn't return for a second visit. And I don't know, maybe that had something to do with things kind of being shut down from COVID. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, but even still, I think to your point, Craig, there are plenty who sort of, are engaged in a community that they might be, that they might call home, but the challenges of being a part of a community a lot of times, because it is hard to be in relationship, and I think because of that, like, there are easier simulacra is the word that's coming to mind, but there are easier approximations of like not quite good enough approximations of true community, right? Like whether it is sort of getting together with an affinity group that never really challenges you, or using social media as your primary group. Like there's things about being in face-to-face human relationship that are really hard, and so it's easier to nibble at those other, right? If we're talking about the sheep, it's easier to nibble away at this other thing over here that's a little bit easier, right? That's a little bit more comfortable. That's a little bit, and so pretty soon you disengage from whatever community might be vital for you, because you're seeking out easier pastures.
Yeah.
You just
Well,
nibble away from the flock. Yeah.
and maybe not even easier, but more prevalent, because I think the sons are taking their cues from culture.
Mm.
And I think a lot of what we think about God and about Christian faith also comes from culture. So, I mean, you get death and judgment 6 days of the week. Only one day of the week do you get grace and mercy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the one ends up kind of overshadowing and controlling the other. And I think that's what happens with the sons too.
Yeah.
All
I
those-
think I would also conclude, going back to naming the story, we had this conversation earlier. We call it sometimes the prodigal son, or even more generously, the waiting father. I've heard that term used, but I think it's important that we talk about this as the father with two sons, because I think both sons are lost. Usually we identify the one as being lost, but I would suggest that the older one is lost at home because his relationship with his father doesn't appear to be a healthy one. It has to do more with just obedience, performance, and everything you asked me to do, I've done. And then that becomes that deserving part of your life where you think you owe me, and you don't owe your youngest son anything, but you owe me the farm, kind of thing. And that's where we run into dangers, I think, in family systems, where there is one that is no longer considered part of the family, and someone else thinks they need it all or they should get it all because they've been so good to mom and dad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. One finds meaning and identity through work, right? And thinks that that's what makes him worthwhile. One finds meaning and identity through pleasure seeking, right? And the father is saying, no, in my eyes, like your meaning and your identity is not determined by what you do. It's that you're my sons.
Good place to wrap it up, I think.
Yeah.
All right, we will.
Okay. We'll see you all later.
Bye now.